Hey everyone, welcome to Ultra Life Today. We have got someone that I have been wanting to meet and that we have been wanting to interview. And of course, what does the illustrious Adam Payne do to me? He walks in looking all tired last Friday, but looked refreshed. And I said, "What have you been doing?" He said, "Well, I just took a dive." And I'm like, "Wait a minute. Hyperbaric?" And he said, "Yeah, this guy named Paul Conrady." I said, "We have to interview him." And lo and behold, 4 days later, he's right here in our studio. So anyway, welcome to Ultra Life Today, Paul Conrady. How are you, brother?
Hey, thank you. I hope I can live up to all that expectation.
Oh, no. It's going to be great. You know how I first heard of you, Paul? A great friend of mine, we go back 20 plus years, is named Dale Epperson. He had the number one rated television show on Saturday mornings. It was connected with News 9. It was called Found Causes. And he would go and interview people that were in the 501c3 nonprofit, not-for-profit world. And he told me stories after he interviewed, I believe it's your partner or the gentleman that was, what is his name?
Well, Bill Duncan
It was
is
Bill
who,
Duncan,
yeah,
right. And very prolific here in Oklahoma City and even in Washington, I think, as it relates to Hyperbaric. But, you know, you mentioned something before the broadcast. But anyway, Dale told me these stories that were absolutely mind-boggling regarding individuals with PTSD, individuals that had been involved in Gulf War, in Middle Eastern conflicts, all kinds of situations. So I want to mention Paul represents a company called Hyperbaric Fitness OK. And it's a super easy website to remember, hyperbaricfitnessok.com. And we're also going to mention later on several times how you can connect directly with Paul. Really cool guy, and they've got an amazing center just north of our studios here, out past Memorial Road.
Well, we're at Hefner and Hefner Parkway.
Perfect. Okay, I know that area well. So I have to ask you, first of all, I don't know much about your personal background, because before we even get into you moving into hyperbaric fitness and what that, how you got involved in that, what's your own personal background, Paul?
Well, my wife and I had Edmund Security for 32 years.
Okay.
And that's 24/7 on call for that long. We did it. And so we had about 20 employees. And after 32 years, I said, you know, I was going to let my son take off with it. And that wasn't what he wanted to do. So we sold our business. And then I started volunteering about that same time at the Patriot Clinic, where we helped soldiers get their life back.
Yeah, and so something when you transitioned out of your security business, and by the way, now I know how I know you as well, to your security business. I had a business in Edmond, Oklahoma for many, many years, and your name was brought up regularly in circles out there.
I hope in a good way.
It was indeed, it was. So how did you first hear about Patriot Hyperbaric, which was, I believe, out in Bethany, at that location out there in Bethany at the time? How did you hear about that, and what intrigued you as to volunteer there?
Well, I was at a counterterrorism conference. I was in the security business, and I knew a lot of legislatures, and I was very involved with the threat back in the day,
right,
which is becoming even more so today, it seems like. But we had a bunch of dignitaries in from Washington, and we had a meeting down at the House of Representatives. And so as we would go in and out of break, I kept seeing this guy, and I was like, that guy just doesn't fit in here. I mean, here's all these military people, and Bill Duncan doesn't look like that military person. So I went up and introduced myself, and I said, so how do you fit into this group? And he whipped out his card and said, I fix brains. And I said, so you're a neurologist? And he goes, no, I put him in a hyperbaric chamber. And he said, hey, Paul, people are coming back with PTSD by the droves, and we're not fixing them. And we're not going to have an army if we don't start taking care of our veterans that are returning home damaged.
Did you know at the time anything about hyperbaric oxygen? What you call, you told us before the broadcast when you and I and Adam were talking, you said, I take people scuba diving, but you do it obviously in a very controlled environment in a really limited space, and they never go to the ocean, right?
No, they don't get wet. I got to tell people that when we go diving, we don't get wet. So that's where.
Right.
But no, at the time that all this was going on, Bill said they coming back home with PTSD, and I have to apologize to all my veteran community out there. At this point in my life, PTSD was not understood by me. I was like, hey, soldier, you get back home, go back to work, take care of your family. What's this needing full ride benefits, all these benefits for? All you did was go to war, Well, so I put Bill's card in my pocket Friday afternoon. Sunday morning, I'm at church, and the guy sitting in front of me is bawling his eyes out for an hour. Now, our pastor's good. He ain't that good. So I made it a point to catch him in the lobby, and I said, dude, are you okay? And he goes, no, my family asked me to leave last night, and I don't know if I have a place to go back to. I about got violent with my family. And I said, dude, what would make you do that? And he goes, I have PTSD so bad I can't live with myself.
Wow, you just said something there, and so here you are, you meet. First name again of your friend that you met out at the legislator?
Bill Duncan.
Yes, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
So you meet Bill, and isn't it just like God? I have to say this. I get introduced to something that is absolutely life-changing, and typically what God does to me is he throws me under the bus, and I meet a person the very next day or the same day that needs that, and it just kind of cements the world together. It brings confirmation about why we're here, what we're doing, which is helping people. So hyperbaric oxygen, because we're going to go back to this gentleman's story in a little bit. What is the history of hyperbaric oxygen? How far does this go back as a modality that people have used as a therapy tool, and who discovered it? What's it all about?
Well, in 1670, some Europeans built a hyperbaric chamber.
Whoa, no,
Yeah,
no way,
yeah,
really?
I got a drawing of it.
That's incredible.
So if you go online and look for the history of hyperbarics.
And we'll try to include some images of some of the stuff you've done.
Yeah,
so you'll leave that flash drive with us.
So
Okay.
Anyway, that's when it started. And if you can imagine, as they learned about it and they started utilizing it and following outcomes, these doctors in Europe were having success. Well, if you can go X feet for X time, why can't you go deeper and longer and deeper and longer and deeper and longer? And so eventually they started creating what?
So, yes, hyperbaric oxygen.
Decompression sickness.
Right. So I have to ask you real quick. Back in 1670, were they just kind of saying, we don't really know what this will do, so we're just going to put people with all kinds of different maladies and figure out if it helps them?
They were studying viruses for the most part. That's
Wow.
where they studied. That's where they started with this. And now remember, we're talking hyperbaric air. Hyperbaric oxygen didn't come around until the mid 1900s.
Okay.
And it was because, have you ever heard the term caisson disease?
I have not.
So when they were building, I believe it was the Brooklyn Bridge. If somebody gets on there and starts, you can debate me on all this. I'm trying to pull it up right, but I may get some things wrong. But they were building, I believe, the Brooklyn Bridge, and to do that, they had to go down in the river very deep to build the caissons. Well, a lot of people were dying.
Wow.
Can you believe that? I mean, they didn't understand decompression
Wow.
sickness. So I assume that when this was in favor in Europe, it started falling out of favor as people were having a negative response to going deeper and longer.
Wow.
Because in the 1800s, it started falling out of favor. And it wasn't until Orville Cunningham got engaged, and you probably heard this during the COVID outbreak. Orville Cunningham, a doctor up in Kansas City, started treating people with hyperbaric air.
Of course.
Spanish flu. He was pushing back on the Spanish flu and curing the Spanish flu. Okay?
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's so impressive.
Yeah.
So impressive. So fast forward me, we're out of the 1670s now. When did this begin to bring at least a greater level of awareness? I think you had mentioned to me before there may have been some military applications early on.
Well,
what was going on there?
Well, shortly after Dr. Cunningham started having success with this hyperbaric air, a billionaire came to him and said, why don't we build a hotel?
And what is our date on this?
1930.
1930. Oh, wow.
In the
Okay.
early 30s is
Wow.
when they built this hotel. It was 5 stories. It was a ball. It was a sphere. The center level was a dining room, and you had hotel rooms above and below. And people would stay there for the weekend under pressure of air.
Seriously.
Seriously.
Within their normal environment, like a hotel room.
But somebody died in that. I mean, he took everybody in and that were really, really, really sick.
Wow.
And there was a death, I can't remember. I don't know the particulars, but there was some death in that hotel. And when that happened, the powers to be stepped in and said, "Hey, they made a mockery out of him, and he died a pauper. He died with very little money." They took the hotel down and they made ships out of it for World War II. They melted it down.
Wow.
And that pretty much went away. Well, remember we talked about decompression sickness. So imagine that you get into what they were finding was, what if we replace nitrogen or ambient air with 100% oxygen? So around the 30s, they started with hyperbaric oxygen, and they have now eliminated decompression sickness. And the powers to be were still trying to get their hands on God's medicine. God has the patent on oxygen and air and pressure.
And a whole lot of plants, too, as we well know here at Ultra Botanica.
And they couldn't get their hands on it, right?
Right.
So what they did
So they built a regulatory environment around it, didn't they?
So as they were
tell us
studying
about that.
as they were studying oxygen in the mid-30s, the Navy is the one that kind of started up with the study of oxygen, and they used it for decompression sickness to keep from having it. And in 1968, the powers to be made oxygen a drug. So now you have to go get a prescription for oxygen, and it's highly regulated. Our industry, our hyperbaric oxygen industry, is highly regulated.
And yet administering oxygen and hyperbaric are so vastly different.
Well, but imagine that you're putting oxygen into a pressurized environment.
Okay.
Now, what are you creating?
Yeah. All right. You're
A bomb.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. I have been in a hyperbaric chamber, and when I hear that glass make that noise as it's contracting with the metal that is keeping that thing together, I must admit I've had a mild bit of nervousness once or twice when I've done that.
Well, for all those reasons, it is highly regulated at that end of the spectrum because it has to be a safety deal. So anyway, that's where it really went south, and hyperbarics has been very expensive to treat
and
people.
so when
hyperbaric oxygen has been expensive to treat people.
So, and I'm assuming, was it the FDA that kind of put the regulations around that?
Yes.
When they did that, at that point in time, who actually ever used hyperbaric oxygen, and what did they use it for?
Well, thermal burns, CO poisoning, necrosis of the mandibular after you have radiation treatment of your neck or jaw, the top part of your head area. Necrosis, tissue necrosis happens, and so you can repair that with hyperbaric oxygen. So there's at the time in the early, it wasn't until and I don't know exactly what year, but the late 1900s, I believe. And Dr. Bill Duncan's the one that got it approved. He was a appropriator for ISTUC. That's his background in Washington.
Okay.
So he was very instrumental in getting diabetic foot ulcers covered by Medicare as a recognized indication.
Okay. Yeah, and we're going to move a little bit into that world as well. So I want to tell everyone how they can reach out to Paul Conrady. Really great guy. We're going to blow your minds as we move into further segments here. Hyperbaricfitnessok.com. Hyperbaric, if you just try to spell the word hyperbaric fitness, HYPERBARIC, fitnessok.com. You can actually email Paul because it's the same URL, paul@hyperbaricfitnessok.com. And they've also got a 501c3 associated with that called Hyperbarics for Heroes. We'll talk about that in the next segment as well. This is Ultra Life Today. I'm Josh Bell. You kind of pinch hitting here because my dear buddy Adam Payne is not with us today, so we'll be right back.
Our mission is to take nature's most beloved botanicals and enhance them with our liquid protein scaffold technology. This helps it reach your cells faster and better. With exponentially enhanced bioavailability, you'll feel better every day. Ultra Botanica, the feel-good curcumin.
Welcome back to Ultra Life Today, and our special guest today is a guy named Paul Conrady, and again, someone I've wanted to meet for a long time, so privileged to do the interview. A gentleman that is helping a lot of people. What in the world would scuba diving have to do with helping individuals with their health? Well, it's not really scuba diving. It's called hyperbaric oxygen. And we've got Paul Conrady in studio from Hyperbaric Fitness OK. That's hyperbaricfitnessok.com, and you can reach him, Paul, at Hyperbaric Fitness OK. Sometimes they even bring people in and actually allow them to have a first visit free. They do discounts, I believe, possibly for veterans, possibly other people. We'll get into some of that in the particulars, but you brought up something that's really interesting to me. Now, you seem pretty well read. Has there been many studies related to hyperbaric oxygen? I know, like when Adam and I talk about curcumin, and we talk about PubMed, this government repository for clinical research, you can type in curcumin and over 20,000 research articles come up. I'm getting a feeling there's probably quite a few studies on hyperbaric, isn't there?
Yeah.
And why have they done certain studies for hyperbaric oxygen?
There is. So I've got to clarify something that you said a minute
ago. And I know,
ago.
hyperbaric air, you're wanting me to make a distinction, aren't you?
Well,
okay.
Hyperbaric oxygen is there's a lot of criteria around that, safety-wise, doctor-wise, prescription-wise. I mean, so when we had a guy come in that is post-cancer, he had bladder cancer surgery.
Okay.
They put him on the table, and he was inverted for 2.5 times longer than they anticipated. And he woke up blind.
Oh, my
Pressure
goodness.
on the optic nerve.
Wow.
Had he come in that week or that day, he may have got some of his sight back. But a year later, he comes into my office with a friend, and this friend says, I got a guy out in New Hampshire that does hyperbarics, and I want my friend here to do that, to fix his eyes. And I said, he gave me and I said, this is going to be a stretch, but to save you a trip to New Hampshire, I'd love to talk to your guy out there, and we'll replicate it here and see if we can get something out of it. So they gave me his number. I get on the phone with him. We talk for an hour and talk about hyperbarics. I mean, it's just, so at the end of that hour, I said, hey, we're going to get this guy going. And he said, hey, full disclosure. And I'm like, okay, go ahead. He goes, I don't use oxygen. And I said, now, at this time, I'm the secretary of the International Hyperbaric Medical Foundation. We had this come up in board meetings. And when hyperbaric air came up, it was like, look, guys, our whole industry is finally getting where we want to be with hyperbaric oxygen. Why would we step back to 1670?
Words are important things, aren't they? Especially as it relates to regulatory bodies, alphabet agencies that are out there, right?
So when he told me that, and, most people in my industry, that would have been a hang-up. Okay, we're done.
Right.
Well, I said, hey, I have some insight to this. Let's keep talking. I said, I'll call you next week. So over the course of 6 months, we talked about an hour every week about hyperbarics. Okay. Now hyperbaric air.
Right.
So just trading his stories and my stories in oxygen were exact. The number of dives,
Amazing.
the type of the type of issues we're dealing with, they were just the same. So we started diving. See, that's a cuss jar at my office.
Right.
We did hyperbaric sessions for this gentleman, and started moving so we did him at that protocol, and we never moved the needle on his site. His bladder numbers all rebounded big time and surprised the doctors.
Astonishing. And we're just letting people that are viewing us and listening to us today know There are no promises. There is no something where we are going to do this for you when you come in. This is not a treatment. Again, this is being placed in this awesome environment where you can take a great nap. You might pop your ears a couple of times, but it's called hyperbaric air. And there's so much more that you don't know about it as it relates to individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder, with various types of traumas in their life, even that I guess these days would be lumped into PTSD. We're going to talk about things related to individuals suffering from diabetes and things that have happened there. So back to this idea of studies. Have you read some studies on hyperbaric?
There's tremendous amount of information on hyperbaric oxygen.
Okay.
You can anything that you're dealing with, if it's autism, HBOT,
Okay.
you'll get thousands of
So
studies.
I want our viewers to know. So if you want to get on PubMed, and that's PUBMED.gov, type in HBOT, which stands for hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and then type in any particular malady that you might be thinking of, whether it might be an autoimmune disorder thing, and see what kind of studies come up. Do your homework, because if you're out there viewing this now and you're thinking, I wonder if hyperbaric oxygen could help me, do your own homework. Type in HBOT and then the word and then whatever you may be wanting to Google on that and see what happens, okay?
So again, clarification, you're not going to find anything on HBAT, which is hyperbaric atmosphere.
Air, right, or air,
Okay,
yeah, whatever.
or air
Yeah,
for
okay,
short. So
right,
you're
right.
not going to find anything on that because that was back in the...
Right, because the oxygen falls underneath the FDA guideline as an actual term that they pretty much have built this regulatory environment around.
Now,
Okay.
when I say that, we have studies where they did study scuba diving and the release of stem cells, and they identified the depth and the protocol that if I go scuba diving at this depth, this stem cell activation is 300% more.
Okay, you've got everybody out there that watches us that is interested in anti-aging and regenerative medicine, turning back their biological clock, all these things. That's why they take our supplements. That's why they go to these integrative and functional doctors out there that are not just in the place of wanting to cut or wanting to prescribe. They're wanting to get to the root problem. So you just said something about stem cells. Now I want you to say that again and make it really simple so people can understand. What happens when a person is in a hyperbaric air environment? What are some of the things that begin to happen in the body that are positive things?
So again, I'm not a doctor.
Right.
And we talked about this as a disclaimer.
Exactly.
The only thing that I do is observe people that go scuba diving.
Right.
So if I love to find things to measure. I love to find today, one of the big things that nobody talks about, are you familiar with the burn pits?
No.
Okay, well, the burn pits the veterans are familiar with it because when they were in Afghanistan, everything on that base was burned, so it didn't have to be removed by vehicle.
Oh, wow.
So they drove bulldozers around, 5-acre pits.
Constantly, all day
Tires,
long.
batteries, cars, vehicles, human pieces.
Wow.
Everything that they're moving around to burn complete. Well, that plume of smoke goes up and whichever way the wind's blowing. So many of my veterans that come in tell me about having to put wet towels in the doors of their sleeping quarters.
Wow.
And there's soot everywhere. I mean, they may have it there so it's not airborne, but every time they move in their sleeping quarters...
So how did you see
soot.
these burn pits affecting these guys and ladies?
There's esophageal cancers that they've never seen. They're crazy. I mean, it's the Agent Orange of today. That's what we're dealing with, and it's not being spoken. Very few people know about it.
I had not heard the term.
Yeah.
So
So we use a peak flow meter. First time a veteran comes in, they blow it. What it's doing is it's measuring lung capacity and how fast you can exhale your air. And so it's moving a needle, and it's just crazy after X number of dives how far that needle moves.
And out of curiosity, because I know for me, that kind of visual, if I came into your place, I was dealing with this aftermath of this burn pit exposure, and I breathed into that, and then I was back maybe on my second or third visit, and I'm showing a completely different lung capacity, I would be absolutely hooked.
Okay.
And how quickly do you notice things
First
at
dive.
times?
So
Oh
I
my
have a
gosh.
guy comes in from church, and again, I'm just telling people what I see.
Yeah, this is an observational thing
That's just
here.
an observation, but I use all the tools that I can get my
That's
hands on.
fantastic.
So a guy at church had COVID. He was in the hospital. I think 57 days. So he gets out of the hospital. Then he has to go to rehab. Okay, he had a 1-inch hole in his lung. I don't see him for 4 more months before he comes to church, and he's dragging an oxygen bottle. And I'm like, dude, I had no idea. I don't call people, but you know what I do. And I expected a call. And he goes, I don't have any money. And I said, so what's the prognosis? And he said, I'm supposed to be on oxygen. If I can wean myself off, it's going to take a year.
And we know it's a huge struggle once a person gets on oxygen and
Yeah.
relying on
I
that.
said, do you understand how fast you've got to get off of oxygen? This is critical. You've already been on it for 4 months that I didn't know about. You got to get off this oxygen. So anyway, he goes, I said, be at the chamber tomorrow. I said, can you be off oxygen for 10 minutes? And he goes, I said, 5 minutes? Yeah, probably. And I said, okay, be at the chamber, because when we get the pressure up in the chamber, you don't need oxygen. I mean, you're getting oxygen.
There you go, exactly.
So he comes in, and I said, blow in this. He blew in the peak flow meter. He blew a 200. Okay? That's nothing. I mean, you and I, that's hardly.
Now, that's just ultra diminished lung
That's-
capacity, right?
I blow a 600 when I'm normal.
Oh, wow.
So I
Just costal breathing.
So
just
all
sitting here
these
breathing.
people with
Okay.
post-COVID issues that come in, they don't have any breath. Even if they tell me I got all my breath back, I go, here's a peak flow meter. You're going to buy it. It's $30. There's an app on your phone where you
Nice.
put the data. It creates a line chart, and I'm going to watch. I just show them mine.
Yeah.
When I had COVID, mine went from 390 to 600 in 4 sessions.
Impressive.
Okay, so I show
Impressive.
him mine, and I say, this is why we do this.
Right.
So he comes in, blows a 200, gets out of the chamber an hour later and blows a 300.
Oh, my.
Okay? And I said,
Goodness.
you're not done. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, tonight, we've just released stem cells. They're going around your body on a search and rescue mission. They're being drawn to inflammation.
So oxygenating the blood. We talked about this off air today.
Okay, now let's
blood-brain barrier things. I want to get into this, and I want to make a distinction for me.
The
Make a distinction
oxygenation
for me.
We're going to 52 feet of seawater, which
Right.
is 2.5 atmospheres, which means we've increased the atmospheric pressure 2.5 times. Okay? If oxygen is 21%, 20.9. If oxygen's 21%, and we're going to 2.5 atmospheres, what's your gazentas? Do you know what gazentas are?
I do. Jethro Bodine off of the Beverly Hillbillies.
52%.
Nice.
So even though we haven't used any supplemental oxygen,
It's incredible.
we're at
It's incredible.
52% oxygen.
This is a phenomenal time for us to set up for the next segment and talk a little bit more about this, about stem cells, about hyperbaric air, and what it can do for you. You can reach out to Paul Conrady. There's a website, hyperbaricfitnessok.com, hyperbaricfitnessok.com, and then you can reach out to Paul personally. His email address is the same as the URL, but it's got Paul in front of it. Paul at hyperbaricfitnessok.com. Paul at hyperbaricfitnessok.com. This is Ultra Life Today, hanging out with my good friend Paul Conrady, and we'll be right back.